BBC 5 Live.
The real sounds of Africa there to once again kick off our World Football phone-in. And this morning we're talking footy in America, North and South and Middle, if you like, the Caribbean and Central America as well. So with us as ever in the southern half of that hemisphere is the Legendino Tim Vickery in Rio. Good morning, Tim.
Very good morning. Where it's high summer at the moment, which makes me give a lot of sympathy. I'm not. You know, and I'm appalled. It's March, for crying out loud. And how on earth can you be suffering the way that you're suffering?
Take the Mickey.
Well, no, I'm not. This is genuine sympathy. I was a bit worried that you might not be able to make it up to Salford for tonight, but obviously I forgot that not only are you a force of nature, but you also walk around with your own individual aluminium siding to help you.
I like it. John Arnold, our Neymar, is taking care of everything in the northern half of the hemisphere and also in the central half as well. John, good morning.
Morning. How's everyone?
Everyone's fine. We're a little bit chilly. Do you want to tell us what the temperature is where you are?
Oh, I don't think it'll do any good. First of all, the real reason I don't want to tell you is not to be boastful at how good the weather is here. It's because I can't convert into your units.
Oh, right. You're still on Fahrenheit, are you? You're still on Fahrenheit. It gets easier when you turn over to Celsius, you know. It's only divisible by 100. Or at least it's only 100, divisible by 10s or 5s, whatever. Anyway, let's get straight into the World Football phone-in. The number to call if you'd like to join in. You've got a question or comment on football in America, North, South and Central, or in the Caribbean. The number to call is 08085 909 693. That's 08085 909 693. You can text us on 85058, email upallnight@bbc.co.uk. And this one is straight to the jugular, John. Mark in San Diego says, we got reports this week that the North American 2026 World Cup bid is in jeopardy with Morocco, the new favourite. The reporting said South America favours Morocco, but why? Tim can tell us that in a moment, but what Mark wants to know is what your sources are telling you about 2026, John. Okay, and let me get Tim's thoughts there.
Diplomatic silence on that one.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, Tim, tell us, why is South America favouring Morocco over your friends in the north?
John doesn't want to put his mouth in the wrong place and be shut behind aluminium bars, obviously. South America is caught a little bit two ways here, because it wants growing cooperation with the United States, with North America generally. Remember that 2 years ago they held the centenary of the South America's Copa America was held in the United States. It's an idea that they want to do again, but the conflict between them comes around future World Cup hosting, because South America is very, very keen to celebrate the centenary of the World Cup where it started. Now, the first one was in Uruguay in 1930. Uruguay only has one city, so there's no way that it could stage even a 24, let alone a 32 or a 48 World Cup on its own. So it's a joint bid, Uruguay, Argentina and Paraguay, to celebrate the centenary of the World Cup. Now, a possible problem there is the United States winning 2026, because that would be 2 consecutive World Cups in the Americas. And the rest of the world might not react particularly well to that. So I think that there's the thought that if 2026 goes to Morocco, then the chances of South America being successful in this 2030 bid are far greater.
Okay, let me carry on. We'll come back to John in a moment where we can get him back up. This other one as well for you, Tim, South America-wise indeed. It's our listener who wants to know. This is from Carl in Charlottesville, Virginia. Wants to know recently Tite, is it Tite, the Brazil manager, announced...
Coach, yeah, Chichi.
Chichi, I knew it was Chichi, of course, it's Chichi.
No, that's good enough.
But when you'll do better
than a lot of the...
See, when you see it spelled, it just looks so different, I'm telling you. Anyway, recently Chichi, the Brazil manager, announced 15 players who will be a part of his squad for certain at the World Cup. What does Tim think of this? Naming the squad, at least in part, was a big mistake the Scolari made in the lead up to the 2014 World Cup. Sure. Has the reaction to this been mixed in Brazil? I personally feel like it will create more problems than it will solve, says Carl in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Yeah, and perhaps this was in the course of an interview that Brazil's coach Chichi made this declaration, and perhaps he revealed more than he wanted to. I'm not entirely sure how much of this was totally planned, but it doesn't really tell us anything that we didn't know already. And the results since he took over have been so sensational. And when he took over, remember, a third of the World Cup qualifying campaign had gone, and Brazil were in 6th place. And then he took over, and in the last 12 games, they won 10 and drew 2, scored plenty and hardly conceded any. So those players who've achieved those results, and obviously they deserve to go to the World Cup. What is interesting, I think, he named 15 with only one goalkeeper. He didn't name Edison, who I think is an absolute dead cert as well, really. And when you go through the rest of the numbers, to those 15, you add 2 goalkeepers, you add a reserve right-back, a reserve left-back, and a reserve centre-back. He's already named 1 reserve centre-back, you add 1 more. That brings you up to 17, 20.
Do the math.
After that, there's only 3.
Do the math.
There's only 3 places left. Yeah, you say aluminium, I say aluminum. Let's call the whole thing off.
Exactly.
After that, there's only 3 places left for all of the midfield and all of the attack. Now that means, obviously there's the possibility of injuries, and I'm sure one subject that people will want to get into tonight is the situation with Neymar, but there's always the possibility of injuries. But as it stands, barring injury, if you're a midfielder or a striker and you want to get in and you're on the outside, it looks like it's going to be very, very difficult. Now recently at the Premier League game between Watford and Chelsea, we saw Richarlison, the Watford Brazilian striker, substituted in the second half, and really, really upset about it. And he was crying, and because he'd been taken off in a game that Watford won easily. Now he didn't really have much of a case, and he was replaced by the Argentinian Pereira, who came on and made a goal and scored one. But Richarlison, I think one of the reasons he was so upset is that he hasn't scored a goal against one of the big 6 in the Premier League this season. This was his opportunity against the Chelsea side who were looking ragged. The game was being broadcast live in Brazil. It was really a chance to do something to force his way in. And he wasn't able to take it, and he was taken off with some 20 minutes to go. And I think that's part of the explanation for his reaction, that he felt this was a real chance to try and force himself into Brazil's World Cup squad had gone. So barring injuries, if you're a striker or a midfielder, you've really got to do something sensational between now and the end of the season to get yourself into the World Cup squad.
Yeah, Neymar's back. So, John, why? What have you heard from your sources about how Morocco is now the favourite for 2026 rather than the USA?
Am I in? Hello?
Yeah, we're still here. Can you hear me?
I can.
Gosh, what is
you're
that
asking
sound?
about?
What's that sound? God, there's
you're asking.
Some unpleasant sound. I'm sorry. Is that, yeah,
it's my voice.
No. Apart from your voice, there's some interference that we'll try. We're going to have to dial you back, mate, because that will just drive us bonkers. We've had a lot of snow over the last few days. To add that interference into the mix as well, trust me, will not be helpful whatsoever.
That was a sound, Don. That was the sound of fingernails being scraped down aluminum, wasn't it? It was awful.
I thought that was the sound of when doves cry. Max in London, good morning.
How are you?
I'm fine, thanks very much. Good to speak to you. Go ahead. You got a question for Tim, yeah?
Yeah, a question for the Legendino. I was just remembering a time, basically about 3 years ago, I went to a game. It was Flamengo v Botafogo, and Clarence Seedorf was playing for Botafogo at the time. And he looked head and shoulders above everyone on the pitch, playing really well. I wondered how he was sort of perceived there in his time, but it brought me on to the wider question of European players in South America, and whether there's only currently any European players in South America that were having success, or historically when the South American League was stronger, whether there's any European players who'd had a great deal of success in South America. And that was my question.
There have been very few in recent years. There was a Serbian called Petkovic who had success with a number of Brazilian clubs, and he'd worked it out. He'd been on the books of Real Madrid, Petkovic, but he hadn't got on the field with them, and he was a playmaker who wasn't quite good enough. He was very talented, but he wasn't quite good enough to fill that position in top-class European football, where the lines of the team are much closer together, there's less space on the field. So he'd worked it out that if he went to Brazil, exactly for that reason, that the standard was a little bit lower, then he could be a star. And he was a star for a few years. And Clarence Seedorf also was a star. And I was a little bit worried about him when he came, because you thought, how is he going to fit in? And I know some other coaches, and the coach that he had at Botafogo was a little bit worried. How is he going to fit in? And the way that he fitted in was to absolute dominate everything that was happening on the pitch. I mean, he's very, very intelligent, Seedorf, and he kind of worked out where in any particular game he could be best used. And if it needed him dropping deep to start off the moves, then he'd do that. And if it needed him to go, if there was a lack of space through the middle, then he'd go out wide. He'd orchestrate the play for there. If there was space up front, then he'd go and play off the striker. And everywhere he was, that's where the football was being played. And I think he enjoyed himself so much. It was like watching a man having a second childhood. You know, it was like watching him play the way that he would have been playing when he was a kid in kickabouts, you know, when he was far, far better than anyone else. Because all during his professional career in Europe, you know, he's playing for big clubs, he's got a certain role. And this time he could just do whatever he wanted to do, and it all worked, and it was great. It was a real pleasure to watch him for all of those years. And I wonder if he could have his time again, whether he would have stayed a little bit longer. Because what happened, when he got Botafogo qualified for the Libertadores South America's Champions League, and then the proposal came in from Milan to come and coach the team. So he gave it up. So that's when he retired, and he went off to Milan, and Milan gave him something like 3 months and then sacked him. So I wonder if he could have his time again, if he would enjoy himself, you know, for another year or two playing, because he's got a lot of time to be a coach, and he's just got a job now with La Coruña in Spain, where he hasn't started very well there either. I hope that he's given the time to be able to impose himself on the team the way he imposed himself as a player on the Botafogo side. But no, there haven't been that many. I mean, there's one who's not having any success at the moment, who is London-born, although he represents Turkey, Colin Kazim Richards. Remember him? He played in a number of clubs. I think he came up the ranks with Arsenal and played in a number of clubs in England, and he went to Turkey. He played for Celtic as well. And he came over, he played for Curitiba in the south of Brazil. It's where his wife is from, and did all right there. And then he was signed by the big club, Corinthians. And he hasn't done so well there. In fact, some people treat him with a complete lack of respect, as if he's like a laughing stock. And in Corinthians' squad for the Libertadores, they haven't even named him in the squad. So things aren't going particularly well for him. But then he was never really a top-class European player. You could see why, I think, the top-class European players would be a little bit reluctant to do it, because they've got other options, you know, that they can go and earn in China. Even if the MLS now is taking fewer older players, you know, they can go to China or the Middle East or something and earn money there. I think they've got two doubts about Brazil. One is, are they definitely going to get paid? Is the club going to keep its word? And the other one would be a little bit of fear from their families about the social violence. So I think that probably explains why more of them don't do it. But I know I did a TV show with him. I know how happy Seedorf was when he was over here playing. So maybe in the future we'll have more.
Yeah, Max, thanks a lot for the question. I think I'm just going to give the 2026 World Cup to Morocco, just in case we jinx it one more time by asking Neymar that question. So let's move on swiftly. This one for you, Neymar, with regards to the MLS. This is from El Salvador. Eric is in El Salvador listening to us. I was watching, he says, Seattle Sounders having some difficulties in 3 half times against Santa Tecla from El Salvador. In the end, they're in the quarterfinals facing Chivas in crisis, and this is the CONCACAF competition. Do Seattle have a chance, and does an MLS side have a chance to win the CONCACAF Champions League, which have always been won by Mexican sides? And a sub-question for Il Legendino in a moment or two, but yours first, Johnny.
Yeah, absolutely. So the quarterfinals are set in the CONCACAF Champions League. The new format sort of tried to take out some of the sort of superfluous games that had been during the group stage. Now it's all knockout. So FC Dallas, the team that I'm very near geographically, was eliminated by Tauro, a Panamanian team. And Seattle, as Eric mentioned, struggled a bit in El Salvador and then in the first half before they went on pretty easily in the second half and were able to move through. Now they face Chivas, a team that's really struggling in Mexico. They beat a Dominican side to get through the round of 16 and get into the quarterfinals. I like the Sounders' chances against Chivas, and I also like the Red Bulls against Tijuana. Xolos in Tijuana, they haven't had a really convincing start to the season for me. Their defense has been solid, but they have they don't have much going on in attack. And I think the Red Bulls might be able to take advantage, especially if they're able to score in that first leg. So I think those two teams are teams that can maybe have hope of moving on. And Toronto FC, probably the best MLS team, certainly the reigning champion. They're playing the reigning champion of Mexico, Tigres, in what should be a very exciting game. I don't know about their chances as much. I think both teams will really go for it. I think it'll be a lot of fun to watch those games. But I think maybe the other two MLS teams that move through have drawn easier opposition. So it's going to be great, and it's happening fast and furious. The round of 16 just concluded yesterday, U.S. time, Thursday, and we get back going again on Tuesday. So there's really no rest for the weary, and then the semifinals will be here in 2-3 weeks after that round concludes. So it's really rolling along, and it's been quite fun to watch. I think the format change is a win for CONCACAF. Until MLS teams start actually beating Mexican teams and winning the title, I don't know that we're going to be able to take it any more seriously than we have been taking it. Is this the year? That's always the question. I'm afraid it might not be, because Toronto FC has drawn such a difficult path.
In a sentence, if you will, Tim, who's the best South American prospect, but World Cup prospect playing in Mexico of the MLS, would you say?
Well, it's one for John. If there are any MLS or Mexico...
No, but South American prospect playing in Mexico or MLS.
Maybe like a Nicolas Odero, who's Uruguayan, but with Seattle.
Okay. That's good enough for me.
For the World Cup, it's very hard to imagine anyone playing in MLS being picked for the World Cup. Okay. Mexico will have a few, because there's some Colombians there.
No, MLS will have Yotun from Peru probably, and you'd think Nicolas Odero from Uruguay probably will make the final squad, or no?
No. Well, you're right. Yeah, I think he will. Yeah, I think Lodero's in the squad. I'm sorry, I forgot him. Played alongside Seedorf at Botafogo.
I think there's two or three Peruvians and an Uruguayan make it from MLS. That's my bold prediction.
Okay. Aaron is with us in Reigate.
I'll bow to you.
Sorry, what was that, Tim?
I'll bow to you, John.
Can you bow properly now, deeply? I can't see you bowing.
No, because I'll hit my head on the laptop, but it just won't work.
That's not
it's a laptop that's made of solid aluminum. I'll do myself serious damage.
Okay. Aaron in Reigate. Good morning.
Morning, everyone. I'm a day late, but it's a St. David's Day question. And firstly, I'd like to. I don't think Tim got enough props for his Suspenbach singing in the Euros.
I agree with you there.
No, it was very good. Very good.
I do agree with you.
The melody, everything was very good.
Yeah.
But my question as a Welshman is... I love excellent Justin singing, anyway.
Yeah, it's true, very true, yeah.
Has been... We've seen lots of great players like Ian Rush, Mark Hughes, Ryan Giggs not qualify for major tournaments because they've been the best player of a bad bunch, and I was wondering if in their regions, who's the sort of the best player that's never made it to a tournament from a sort of a smaller region, for a smaller country. Sorry.
That's a good question. Tim, do you want to go first?
Well, he just managed to play Alex Aguinaga of Ecuador, who was a magnificent Ecuadorian playmaker, who really put Ecuadorian football on the map in the 90s. He just managed to get to the 2002 World Cup, but he was past his best. But probably, if I have to name one who didn't play with the obvious exception of Alfredo Di Stefano, who went to the '62 World Cup with Spain. Although he was Argentine and played for Argentina, had played for Colombia, he went to the '62 World Cup with Spain, but he was injured and didn't get on the field. If I have to name one, it will be Alberto Spencer. Spencer was another one from Ecuador. I think his father was from Jamaica, hence the name Spencer, which isn't your average Ecuadorian surname. And he was just a magnificent centre forward, fabulous centre forward, an absolute goal machine. Right foot, left foot in the air. He wasn't particularly complicated. He wasn't particularly subtle, but he banged the ball in the back of the net and has all sorts of records in South American football. But he nearly got to 66 with Ecuador. It's the one time they got close before they made it in 2002. He also played, these were bizarre times when you could play for two countries. He played for Uruguay as well, although he only played for Uruguay in friendlies. I think he scored at Wembley against England. And he would be the one, an absolute legend in South American football.
Big, club team.
Yeah, he played for Peñarol in Uruguay at the start of the 60s when Peñarol were vying with Santos of Pelé to be the best player in the best club in South American football. And Peñarol, they also had some mighty battles with European champions, because in those days, in the early days of the Libertadores, you had a home and away tie between the champions of Europe and the champions of South America. And Spencer scored some big goals in those games as well. So an international audience did see him, but not nearly as much as they would have seen him had he been able to go to a World Cup.
Johnny?
Right now, the answer, unfortunately, is Christian Pulisic, the young American teenager. But hopefully that will change soon. I have to say, on a more serious note, I never saw him in person, but I hear tale of Romel Fernandez, who the Panamanian National Stadium is now named for. He, at a very young age, when it wasn't common for Central American players to go across the Atlantic, he went and played in Spain with Tenerife, had a very successful year. One year, I think he was named the best American, broadly speaking, so myself and Tim's region in Spain, and tragically was killed in a car accident when he was rather young. I think he was 27 or 28 whenever his life ended, was still playing in Spain. And Panama making their first World Cup appearance this year in 2018. So there's a bit of a legacy of Romel Fernandez, also the Deli Valdez brothers, who have gone on to coaching as Panamanian players who accomplished a lot overseas, but were never able to do it with the national team.
What about Clyde Best, Bermudan striker, unparalleled centre forward, never stood a chance of getting anywhere near a World Cup, never had a sniff of it, and arguably one of the best centre forwards to have come out of that region.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, a player who I wasn't able to see live, but and even managed the Bermudian team at one point. So certainly a great shot there for a legend.
And just because you've never managed to see him live, let me just say, just so that you don't make a mistake, he's the one without the leather trench coat. Richard Roundtree's the other bloke. Very similar moustaches, though, I'll say that. Aaron, it's true. Am I lying? Can you tell the difference?
It's just a sex machine for all the chicks.
You had to go there, didn't you? Aaron, thank you very much for the call.
Would you say that Cat Clyde Best was a bad mother?
Shut your mouth.
I'm talking about Clyde Best.
Yeah, I know you are. Just shut your mouth. As Stormzy would say, shut up! Wee Willie in Glasgow says, with Lionel Messi not allowing airplanes to fly over his home and so cancelling Barcelona airport expansion plans, do any of your guests know of any other player who are so clearly up themselves and wielding such power over population? Imagine that Madonna may have some history, but holding an entire city to ransom. Great show as per usual, though. But did he really do that, Tim?
It's a story that's broken in the last couple of days. I'm not entirely sure it's true. You kind of hope it isn't, really, because I'm reluctant to go there until you see it kind of official from a source that isn't a purveyor of tittle tattle.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you there. Any tittle tattle from your ends that we should dispatch with at the moment straight away, John?
Yeah, anything I say, I can't think of anyone who's done such things. There's a lot of times that a city shuts down. We've talked about Cuauhtemoc Blanco, the mayor now of Cuernavaca, a city in Mexico. So I'm sure there's been some frustration of him causing traffic. The last time I was there, people were saying, "Oh, he's always going and showing up, and we have to fight traffic and go a different direction." So maybe I can toss him in the mix, but no one that's done it at such a grand stage. If that tale is true.
Well, similar question to the one you had earlier. Bill from Jersey City wants to know whether you think that any of the 3 MLS clubs in the CONCACAF Champions League quarterfinals have a chance to win the tournament, specifically his beloved New York Red Bulls. Do they have a shot to knock off Club Tijuana of Mexico in the next round? Yeah, World Football Phone-in this morning. The number to call if you'd like to join in the conversation. We're talking football in North America, South America, the Major League Soccer region, the CONCACAF region, and etc. So, in fact, we're talking about football and everything else to do with North, South, and Central America as well. George Weir, not quite the right region, but Mish has pointed out on Twitter that he, of course, was a player in a country that would never get to a World Cup, and he was an outstanding player there. Going back to our previous
I wonder how many Africans would fit into that, because the African Cup of Nations started in the 50s. Before the European Nations Cup started, the European Championships, and it seems to have been a golden age. But at that time, Africa didn't have any places in the World Cup. So you wonder how many great Africans there are.
His son, Timothy, was born in the U.S. He's a U.S. youth international, and he's in the first team for PSG this weekend. So it sort of fits my region.
And he could end up being president of the United States because he was born there, just like his father, like father, like son. You know what I mean? This one for Christopher. I've got to ask you this before we get onto the Club Tijuana bit. Christopher wants to know, Tim, he says he'll be listening live tonight for the first time in a long time. Loads of O's there. At 9 p.m. in Colombia will be the time he'll be listening. So he's listening now. It's 9 or 10 or whatever it is there. And he says, my mum's just arrived, taking her to watch Millonarios versus America de Cali on Sunday. What can she expect? Looking forward to another excellent show.
We've all gone to look for America of Cali, which I don't think was what Simon and Garfunkel had in mind.
Sure.
It's a nice little stadium, nice big stadium, I think, El Campín in Bogota. And Colombian stadiums usually have a terrific atmosphere inside them. These are two big clubs, and Millonarios are a traditional club from the capital. It's the club that Di Stefano played for in the early 50s when they were possibly the greatest club side in the world. They had talent from all over the place, especially Argentina. And America were a huge club, especially in the kind of 80s. When they were, to be honest, financed by the Cali cartel. They were a kind of Latin American Real Madrid. They had talent from all over the place. They reached 3 consecutive finals of the Libertadores and lost all 3. They've had some hard times recently. They've only just come back from the second division, so it's a chance to see the red shirts of America on the rebound. Some interesting players to look at. I mean, the Millonarios goalkeeper is from Venezuela, Wilker Fariñas, who is, I don't think he's 20 yet, but he's Venezuela's first choice goalkeeper. He was the hero of their side that reached the final of the World Under-20 Cup, lost England in the final last year. And he's a little bit on the short side, but I think he's a magnificent prospect for a goalkeeper. Very, very flexible. And America tend to play with 2 wingers, both of whom I think are really interesting, and Dahomey on the right and Uruguayan Kevin Ramirez on the left have pace and trickery and ability, and they'll try and catch Millonarios on the counter. So I think there's a prospect of a very, very attractive game. And please come back and tell us what your mum made of the experience. It's quite well served now with public transport. They've got a kind of tram type system that takes you right to.
No disrespect to Christopher, I'd rather his mum came back and told us what the experience was like for her rather than him come back. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we don't want to order anyone around, whoever wants to.
No, but I'm just saying my preference would be to have his mum tell us what the experience was like. You know, because Christopher's a dyed-in-the-wood World Football Phone-in fan, and so you'd expect him to enjoy it one way or another. But, you know, would it be as glorious an experience for his mum as you seem to be suggesting it will be? I'd like to hear from her, if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's fine by me. Works for me.
Anyway, haven't you got some bowing to do still? Come on. Mark in Newport's with us. Good morning, Mark.
Morning, gents. How are we?
I'm fine. I think
It's Beberto, unless I'm much mistaken, isn't it?
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Beberto can't be this tired, can he?
No.
He's got a young kid.
I know he's got a
every
young kid, but he
excuse.
can't be this tired. The kid must be about 10 years old now. He's getting ready to start playing professional football. He
That's
can't-
why he's tired.
I know, he should have been tired 10 years ago, however long it was. How is the little one? How's the little one, mate?
Yeah, he's top class. Yeah, he does these kind of football classes on a Saturday morning.
Oh.
And this year was all about the Rabona, trying to perfect the Rabona.
Okay.
So, yeah, he's coming on.
Is that the Ribona trial, which Nelson Mandela was jailed at? Oh, that's Rivona. Okay, Rivona. It's an easy mistake to make. So what is the Ribona then? Am I the only one who doesn't know what the Ribona is?
Is it Rambona or Rabona?
I don't know.
No, Rabona, you're right.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, what is it? Do you want to describe it for us?
Well, there's that kind of behind, kind of one foot kicks behind the other.
Oh, right.
To kind of propel the ball forward, you know.
Yeah, I call it the flash git. Anyway, that's what I call it. You should have told me it was that.
Something I couldn't do.
I can't do it. I don't know how they flipping do it.
How'd you do it and not fall over? It's wrong.
It cheeses you off when somebody does it on a five-a-side pitch, you know. Earlier on today, we had Brossin, a guy that I used to play five-a-side football with. He still reckons he can dribble the ball past me. Dear, oh, dear, oh. He told everybody. We're in the canteen. He's like, oh, no. I always used to dribble Dotung. Anyway, I think he was talking about Dotung. That's not my name. Mark, yeah, so you were saying?
Okay, right. So the question is just obviously within the UK, weather impacted on the fixtures this weekend. I just wonder if either Tim or John kind of got any anecdotes regarding matches being called off.
Yeah, let's go to John
in their regions,
first.
the big ones, you know.
I imagine sometimes it gets really cold in your region. Johnny, do matches get called off, any big ones?
They do. Most of the time can be sort of postponed to the next day and then played sort of in the afternoon, which doesn't make for a great atmosphere if it's, a Sunday match and everyone's going to be off work and, close out the weekend and then all of a sudden the game's Monday at 2 p.m. There was a MLS game not too many years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, that got called off. But the most notable crazy weather game that I recall was one that actually went on. It was in 2013. I was in just outside Denver, Colorado, United States World Cup qualifier against Costa Rica. And it was snowing, and the U.S. got an early goal, and the snow kept falling harder and harder and harder, and the Costa Ricans are going to the referee saying, surely, the ball can't roll, we can't see it, surely we have to call this off, to postpone it. But so the referee at one point does speak to the match commissioner, it rolls on, U.S. wins 1-0 pretty much by scoring early and just sort of punting it through the drifts, quite honestly. There are lots of iconic photos that I'm sure you can look up, but that still sticks in the craw of Costa Ricans. They don't think the game should have gone on. To be honest, they probably have a case, although I was there the next day and the next day, and it was still snowing, icy, horrible conditions, so I'm not sure when that game would have been played. But that's sort of the most memorable. It's called the Snow Classico. Classico, the word for rivalry or derby. That's sort of the nickname that it sticks with everyone in the U.S. and in Costa Rica as well. The Snow Classico. And that's game that still bothers the Ticos. They got their revenge, I think. They're in the World Cup. We are not. So let it go, Costa Rica. But the Snow Classico did go on.
And did you wear your sheepskin coat for that?
You know what? It was one of my very first assignments as a journalist getting paid, and so I'm standing outside, and some of the other journalists kind of gave up because you couldn't write on paper; it was too wet. You couldn't get your computer out. It was going to risk damage from all the moisture coming down. But I thought, they're not paying me to sit inside that warm press box and watch the game. They're paying me to see it with my eyes, and so I pridefully stood out there. But I was a younger, more foolish man then, so I'm not sure I'd do the same. But I buttoned up and toughed it out.
Have you ever used the nom de plume Motson, John Motson?
I haven't. You know what? It's funny because we discussed the FIFA video game series being so influential in the game growing in the United States. That's how most of us know him. I know he's a legendary commentator of real football action in the UK, but we think of him sort of tied to that game, I think.
Yeah. And what about in South America? So many classic ones of matches being called off because of the weather?
Well, we have games called off because of players' strikes or referee strikes. We have games called off because of the good old-fashioned floodlight failure or weather conditions, and especially lightning, which can be very dangerous in this part of the world, or excessive rain. Now, there have only ever, in the history of ever, there have only ever been 8 World Cup qualifiers between Brazil and Argentina. And I don't have that many things to boast about in my life, but one of my proudest boasts is that I've been in the stadium for all of them. But the last one in Argentina, November 2015, I came a cropper. So, I go down, I'm paying my own way down. It's from an economic point of view, it's insanity. It's like, with a hotel and a flight, it's about 500 sovs. It just doesn't make, and I'm paying it. It just makes no sense whatsoever. The game is a Thursday night. River Plate Stadium. Now, I get in the stadium nice and early, and I'm thinking, great, I can watch the other games, and then, this is Brazil, this is Argentina against Brazil in World Cup qualification. This doesn't happen very often. I'm probably one of the very, very few who's been in the stadium for all of them, because they didn't happen until this current century. And then the rain starts, and then the rain starts, and then the rain starts, and then there's just torrential downpour, and you're thinking, my God, I don't think this is going to happen. This was a Thursday night, and then they announced that the game won't take place. It's going to be put back 24 hours. It will take place on the Friday night. Now, for all of the press, they're all thinking, all right, fair enough, come back again. And I'm thinking, oh, for crying out loud, because Friday night's a World Football phone-in. Yeah. So, and the game would just be finishing. It would just be finishing at the time that the World Football phone-in was starting.
You've never missed a World Football phone-in in 20 years.
So I can't miss one. Yeah. So I'm there thinking, well, I'm going to have to go back to Rio, because I will need to stay in the stadium for 2 hours after, with an internet connection inside the stadium, which it's not very good anyway, to do the show, and they won't let me stay in the stadium. They'll kick me out. So I'm going to have to sadly admit defeat, lose this proud record, one of the few proud records I have in these days of mine, and hightail it back to Rio. So I did. Very stroppily. I bought a very nice shirt at the airport to cheer myself up, but I had to get back to Rio, to do the World Football phone-in.
You could have done it from there. You could have done it from
but my flight was already going back on the Friday anyway, so it wasn't worth changing the flight. And here the story it isn't funny. Just as I get back home to Rio, just before the game, and switch the computer on, terrorist attacks in Paris. So what's going to happen then. That was such a huge story. So we didn't have a World Football phone-in that night. So my suffering was absolutely nothing compared with the tragic incidents that happened in Paris. But that's my story about not being able to see a game because of rain.
It's not a bad story. It's not a bad story. David Moyes is complaining about the distances that West Ham fans and the West Ham team are going to have to travel through all this difficult weather. And the problem, whenever whichever side complains about the weather conditions, because arguably the weather affects both sides equally. Whenever there's a side that complains, there's always this suspicion that you're complaining because you've got difficulties. And with West Ham, the question is, well, are they complaining because they've got injuries to members of their squad, and they'd like a few more days for those members of their squad to recuperate so they can have a full quorum or whatever it might be, which is a shame because there are real concerns about teams and fans travelling up and down the country this weekend.
Wasn't it magnificent to see the Rochdale fans at Wembley for that FA Cup replay against Tottenham?
Yeah, it was actually.
And I was delighted that they got that injury time equaliser in the first game so they could have a replay. What a fantastic performance from Rochdale's fans to get themselves down to Wembley for that replay and to keep the noise up during the game. So well done, Rochdale.
Yeah. We haven't had any calls from our overseas contingent yet tonight. Strangely enough, because usually we are inundated with calls from all around the world for people who want to pose a question to the World Football phone. So feel free, if you are, I know you're listening, on 08085 909 693, you can get through to ask either John or Tim a question directly. You know the rules. If you can't get through or you've got any difficulty, drop us your email. Drop us an email to upallnight@bbc.co.uk with your phone number. We'll call you back. This one, though, though, from Drew in Atlanta, who sometimes calls us. Here in Atlanta, they've recently adapted the rules for young players below under 12 to facilitate more playing from the back. Do you know about this, Johnny?
No.
As a coach of such ages, I really welcome this. For 10 years, I have forbidden my goalies to punt or drop kick the ball. The new rules state that such drop kicks are not allowed, but they also draw a 2/3 line, a bit like the old Subbuteo shooting line, behind which attackers must retreat when the goalie has the ball in his or her hands. Do you know this?
No, I mean I've heard some of these ideas kind of mooted, but I haven't. No, I didn't. I haven't really seen it implemented.
And what are your thoughts on it? Out of interest.
Well, look, I think that in the U.S. for years and years, and the Big Wheel talked about it too, and had he had a predecessor, they would have too. I mean, in America, we've always had good athletes, but it's been a difficulty, sometimes playing the ball out, playing on the ball. We've had big hulking center backs, but if you can't play with the ball at your feet in the modern game especially, good luck. And that's been an issue. So, I mean, I think anything we can do to foster that. The other thing is a lot of times any child who is remotely technical gets put up as a forward, and then that's it, So we don't. Part of the reason we don't have fullbacks, I think, is because anyone who has the ball at their feet and can do well getting forward is immediately put into forward. So I welcome that. I mean, I think that it could be something that could bear good fruits for American players' development going forward.
Do you honestly think it makes a difference, though, if you teach kids to play balls out from the back rather than to punt them ahead? It will make a difference in terms of not just.
I think so. And think about how many times a game that means that you're getting a touch instead. You're getting a touch on the ground, and you have to do something with it instead of going up for an aerial ball. I assume this also has something to do with the U.S. Federation looking to or banning and looking to diminish the effect of headers because of the potential of head injury with repeated striking of the ball with the head. So,
because what you're essentially saying, and this is not just for domestic, but perhaps particularly international football, is what Drew in Atlanta is interested in. What you're essentially saying is there's got to be a rethinking of footballing culture in America then.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what we've talked about after failing to make the World Cup. We're not developing the players that we need to. Some teams are. We're seeing MLS academies do good work. We're starting to see that, produce some players, but obviously something didn't go right. The U.S. didn't qualify for the World Cup, and now we have to do a rethink. And if that rethink involves trying to figure out how to make players more technical, and that involves playing out of the back every time instead of booting the ball away every time, or even playing out of the back 80% of the time instead of booting the ball away and just going route one, I think that's welcome would it be.
This is the thing, Tim. I mean, I love the way that, first they say aluminum, then they say route rather than route. Yeah. It's going to be a route. It's going to be a route. And it is. I get what they're saying. Okay? But, you often say, and you have said before, I mean, the danger of changing the culture is that it has consequences. And if what has worked for America so far, because they haven't done badly for a country where football is a minority sport, they haven't done badly in terms.
No.
Sorry?
I think, okay, a consecutive World Cup streak that ended, and one appearance very deep in the World Cup in 2002. Other than that, not much to show at the international level on the men's side. The women's side, of course, very successful. So you look, sure, it's not the most popular sport here, football, but we've managed to have this much success with this population playing, and we're not progressing right now. So I think it's great to try new ideas. Atlanta's a hotbed of soccer right now. They're able to look at the example that Atlanta United is setting with Tata Martino as the coach and some of the South American players showing this is how you can play as a teenager with technical skills, making a lot of money, potentially going to Europe in the next 2 years. And I think that this kind of rule tweak is even more encouraging for those kids.
But if Route 1 has worked for them so far, Tim,
I don't think it...
No, but if it's worked for them, they beat England, didn't they, in 1950 or whatever it was. If Route 1 has worked for them so far, is it not a little bit dangerous to change that culture directly and pay the consequences, especially if it doesn't work. If it doesn't work for you, you think, well, why did we change that culture?
Well, two routes diverged in the wood, and I got hopelessly lost. I think this kind of change is pertinent to all youth football everywhere. I think this transcends just the United States, because there is a thing that can happen in youth football where what ends up being prized is the precocious physical development, the one who can kick the ball furthest. And just to illustrate that this can be a problem where I'm speaking from also, I did a TV programme last month with Mauro Silva, the Brazil holding midfielder from the side that won the World Cup in '94, and he's working with the São Paulo Federation now. And one of the things he stopped is like 12-year-olds playing on full-size pitches. So, it's stupid. It gives the place to the one who can boot the ball the furthest. It doesn't make any sense in terms of long-term development. So this move, encouraging the construction of moves from the back, I think is very, very worthwhile. The thing that I was waiting for was, well, how do you stop the opponent just pressing up and the ball very close to goal, and then you introduce the rider of that kind of Sabutio line, stopping them. So you could argue it's an artificial method of doing it, but for me that's well worth the construction. Having an artificial measure, I think, at that stage in people's careers is well worth it, because even playing on a reduced size pitch is, I suppose, an artificial construction, but it's one that works and then is necessary. So I would see this as a move pertinent to all youth football anywhere.
Couldn't you even argue, Tim, that futsal, which has been so critical for so many players in your region, that's also a modification of the game, right? That's a different way to learn the skills that then translate to the full field. So again, I think that's something a lot of people in the U.S. are trying to get more futsal fields and courts and built, and more kids involved in that. So I think that's just an extension.
Okay, let's see.
Works for me.
Yeah, Mick in Greenwich. Good morning.
Morning, Dalton.
Good to meet you, mate. It's been It's been snowy.
How are you?
I'm very well. It's been snowy where you are, yeah? It's been very snowy.
Snowy? Oh, goodness, yeah, and all the coal coming in from the Thames.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And Lewisham, it's got its own weather, Lewisham.
You sound just like Ronnie O'Sullivan, honestly, genuinely. Has anybody ever said that?
No.
That's true. Well, anyway, I'll be the first to say it then. But you've got a question. You've got a question for Tim and John, yeah?
Yeah, I was told I have to be brief.
Wow.
Well, listen, the White Arsene Wenger lost to Manchester City during the week, don't you?
Yeah, twice.
It's because his team talk, he's really out of touch, Arsene. I think, and I dug the dressing room. So, do you want to hear the team talk?
No. Just you go on. You go on.
Okay.
We haven't got time for the team talk this time. Come on, mate. We haven't got time. You know that. Go ahead. So what question were you going to ask? Go on. Ask the question. Never mind his team talk. Mick, come on, man. Come on. We haven't got time for this, mate. We haven't got time for this. We have not got time. Oh, come on. Yeah. Oh, well, I did try and get you in, mate. I did get you in, and you had a good question as well. Maybe we can pick up on it another time. Okay, I'm going to throw this other question in very quickly, if I may. Yeah, this one. Lani from New Jersey, the question for you, Tim. Does Arthur, the Brazilian midfielder of Grêmio, have an outside chance to make Chiche's Brazil World Cup squad?
Certainly does, yeah. Artur, a little kind of prototype Iniesta. And that explains why Barcelona are working very hard to secure his signature. And Chichi likes him very much, already brought him into the squad. The problem is that he suffered an ankle injury at the end of November, and he hasn't come back yet, so he's running out of time. And as I said earlier on, there are very, very few slots available for midfielders and strikers. But I think Artur is certainly, and if he can get himself back and playing and in form, I think he's got a probably more than 50-50 chance.
Yeah, okay. Got another question for you as well, but I'm looking at the time now. I'll tell you what, talking about that dribbling from the back, John, would you mind dribbling from the back for me for the next 45 seconds?
Absolutely. You just have to create that sort of situation in today's game. If we see goalkeepers do it. You gotta be able to play with your feet. You can't just use your hands anymore. You have to do it, Don. You have to be able to build from the back.
And can the New York Red Bulls get a shot to knock off Club Tijuana of Mexico in the next round of the CONCACAF?
I think so. I think they got a shot, and then the bracket looks nice. The bracket looks nice for them, but they got to get developed and get the new guys integrated.
Yeah. New York, the Big Apple. New York, the Big Apple. More on this in a moment.
5 Live at the Oscars, Sunday from 9.
Indeed. I remember last year at the Oscars, Colin was telling the story there. Colin Patterson, he's going to be there for us this Sunday night as well, Monday morning. But last year, what happened, literally, it was coming to the end of the programme. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. It came up to 5 o'clock, a minute before. And I'm like, goodbye, Colin. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate that. He said, oh, hold on. Don't go anywhere. Don't go, Dawson. Stay where you are. Can you believe it? They've called out the wrong film. Oh gosh, it was funny, man. It was funny. It was one of the craziest moments of my broadcasting career. Good old Colin, he caught us just in time. So we had that historic moment here on Up All Night. Could it happen again? Well, who knows? He's going to be with us this Sunday night, and he'll make sure that we get the story if it happens again. So, World Football phone in, as ever. The number to call if you'd like to join in is 08085 909 693. 08085 909 693. We're talking football in America, North and South and Central. We've got the Neymar, John Arnold with us in Fort Worth. Are you in Fort Worth? You're in Texas somewhere, aren't you?
Yeah, just over the road in Dallas. I was going to say, Don, that's in our parlance. That's a stoppage time own goal when you call it the wrong best picture at the last minute.
It was. That's exactly what it is. A stoppage time own goal, and great to have a stoppage time referee like Colin Patterson to intervene at the very last moment. Yeah. It was something else. And the Legendino in Rio, Tim Vickery's there with regards to South American football. And as Anand in New Delhi would say, Tim, buenas noches?
Boa noite, he usually says.
Boa noite. Boa noite. I'll tell you what, let him say it for himself. Go on, Anand, you can say it for us.
Hi, Doug. How are you, Mike?
I'm doing fine, thanks very much. Buenas noches? Buenas noches, Anand?
Buenas noches, Tim. Yeah, buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Anyway.
And in fact, they usually say buenas noches, Tim.
I should
That's
remember.
indeed, yeah.
And we usually say good evening to John as well. But if you don't do that in India, don't worry about it. Yeah, don't worry about it. Don't say.
I mean, in India, what we do is first we tell the weather. So it is bright, sunny, and 23 degrees Celsius in Delhi.
Yeah. Go on. Go on, take the mickey out of us some more. Go on. So you haven't had the pleasures of.
How are you, Mike?
Hey, how's it going?
So you lot in India have not had the pleasure of a snowy weekend then, or a snowy week. Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Yeah, exactly.
And
I mean, you guys are all acting like little lilies in the sun. I mean, I just checked this Bills versus Colts NFL game, and they have snow like 1 feet.
Yeah.
And John can tell more about it rather than me.
Yeah, we've got about 3 or 4 feet of snow
Yeah.
where I live. I saw a huge fox cross my garden. I don't know if the foxes get bigger in the snow. Do you know, by any chance? They get bigger in the snow.
I never saw the sunlight.
Yeah, I just ran for my life. Because this fox was more like a wolf. And he dribbled the ball past me as well. That was the amazing thing of all. Anyway, go on. You got a question?
Yeah. And John, I like your perspective on it, and Tim, yours too. Recently, the Under-17 World Cup happened in India. So what the federation did was that, it's coached by one of the Brazilian guys. So what the federation has done is that they have created a new spot for the Under-17 team in the National League. So now the under-17 team is playing in the Premier League level of first division in India. And those guys are, they're 17 and 19-year-old. So, and right now their success rate is around 25 to 27% win percentage. So my question regarding their progress, especially the youth development and all, is how does it impact when you put two young people in a position where they are not expected to win, but they are expected to, improve their skill per se in a very high-intensity environment.
That is such a good question,
It is.
Yeah,
and just a quote, two examples from the U.S. What Tiger Woods' father did was, and I think similar thing Richard Williams did with Serena Williams and Venus Williams, that they never allowed their kids to play with the people who can beat them while they were growing up, so that they don't know the feeling of losing. So these 17-year-old kids are continuously losing for over a period of time. So how does that impact their mentality to win, to improve their skills, and that part of the whole game?
That is I can't. You always come up with great questions. I'll give that to you, Anna. And this is such a good question because, of course, it's not just about 17-year-old kids. It's about teams coming up from lower divisions to a higher division, to the Premier League here in the UK, for example, and they're expected to go right back down because, they're going to get beat quite a lot of times. What does that do to the psyche? I don't know, which of you guys want to take it first, Tim or John?
You choose. That's what the referee's there for.
Go on, John. John, do you want to give us a sense of that, first of all, from an American perspective? What does it do to the psyche, not just of a younger person, but even of we're talking about how America has, managed to get into World Cups. Nobody's ever expected them to even get out of the knockout stages sometimes. Sorry, of the group stages, yeah. And what does that do to the psyche of particularly Americans who are used to winning and winning and winning and winning when we know they're not going to win the World Cup?
Yeah, and the individual sports element is interesting as well. Some of the Williams sisters or Tiger Woods, these incredible individual athletes who have been sort of coached from a young age by, some would say overbearing fathers or parents. It is interesting. I think it's maybe dangerous to make generalizations, though. I think that sometimes when a team comes in and there's no expectations, they can play a little more freely maybe, and psychologically they say, even Rochdale against Tottenham, they can go for the game, of course, why not? Everyone thinks they're going to get killed. If they go for it and they get force a replay, then everyone cheers them, good on them. But I think there's also sometimes a curse of low expectations, if team knows that they're not expected to win, I think they can sometimes buy into that. I think a lot of times it depends on the individual, and then in the case of a team sport, a lot of times maybe the coach and how the coach is putting those thoughts into his team's head or not, saying that everyone thinks you're going to lose. How are we going to overcome this, or not, sort of taking advantage? I mean, even in the CONCACAF Champions League, you see minnows all the time, Central American teams from Dominican Republic, smaller countries, islands, and or qualification is another example where, these huge teams are playing against tiny teams, and how they come at the game is fascinating. I think that they're usually best served when they try to win, when they try and play their game, when they try and do what they know how to do well, and aren't sort of intimidated by the stature of the other program. And I think that's also, at least from an American perspective, what we applaud, these underdogs. We say, you can do it, go, and that's what we root for. So I don't know. I mean, I think it can go either way psychologically.
No, I get that. I get that it can go either way, but it's slightly contradictory, though, what you're saying, I may say so, because you're saying, on the one hand, it's better if the shackles of, the expectation is not on them. And at the other side, towards the end there, you were saying that actually it's better when they try and play to win.
I think, like I said, I think it depends. I think it depends on how the coach takes kind of approaches it, and how in the team sport and in an individual sport, how the individual takes that on. I think that you can either get beat down by it, or you can sort of embrace it.
For the psyche of young American footballing talent, though, because there is an American psyche and cultural approach to these things, as we were discussing earlier, with passing the ball from the back, going forwards. For the psyche of an young American football player, particularly in a world where, as you say, the Williams sisters winning everything, all American athletes winning everything, and suddenly they're in a sport where they are not expected to win anything. Is that advantageous, or is that demoralizing for them?
I think that is maybe not demoralizing, but I think it's if we set our expectations low, those low expectations will be met. And I think maybe that's part of the reason I pushed back a bit when you were saying that the U.S. has sort of overachieved on a grand level of football. Because if our goal is to just make the World Cup group stage every year, then sure, we've done exactly what we've been supposed to do for the last 2 decades. But that shouldn't be the goal, right? We should keep pushing and keep pushing. And I think if you say, well, it's at the U20 level, and I'm not sure this isn't even the mentality of the people in the program, but I do agree that on a world scale, the Americans are probably not going to do much. And I think that low expectation can be a curse, and that players can say, well, we were only supposed to get this far, so it's a success. Whereas if the standard is lifting the trophy, and then reasonably after the fact looking and saying, you know what, at the end of the day, third place is a result we should be proud of, or what have you. I think that can be healthy. But it's a difficult line to balance, especially when you're talking about young kids, because I think it's very difficult. It's very easy for kids to get burnt out on playing soccer if it's not fun anymore. If you don't have, when you turn it into something that it's not. I've seen a lot of youth players who have potential and talent say, you know what, I don't love this, I'm going to do something else. So it's a difficult balance to find.
Yeah, with us, certainly my generation, I was 6 years old when England won the World Cup, and we really did believe that we were world champions, for many years after that. But by the time 1970 World Cup came along, we thought we were going to win it, and that's the impact it had on a young person like myself and all my friends. We were the world champions, and we expected to win. And I imagine it's even more so in countries like Brazil and Argentina, which generally dominate our conversations about South America. You wonder what young kids in, say, like Peru or somewhere like that are thinking when they go and play in a CONCACAF tournament, in a Copa del Rey.
Quite often they're thinking that they're going to lose.
Yeah, of course.
There's a huge difference here in mental strength between the Brazilians and the Argentines and say, the Peruvians.
Yeah, so what's that do to them? What does that do to the Peruvians in that case?
It means that they really, really lack self-esteem. I think the current coach has done a terrific job giving them the calm necessary and he identified a group of players and he stuck with them through thick and thin, because it can be a hysterical atmosphere of self-hatred in Peru, and really horrible. They really turn on their own players. But the situation that Anand has brought up, I think it has there are two sides to this. One is mentality, and the other is physical imbalance, because we're talking about an under-17 team playing against senior sides. From the point of view of mentality, now all youth football, the priority should never be results. The priority should always be the development. But winning is part of that development. It's part of the process. It's not good to lose every week. It's not good to be outgunned to that extent every week. That does surely end up lowering expectations. On the other hand, I think there are real possible psychological problems with not preparing young athletes to lose. I think that for me, that's a psychological cruelty that can have disastrous effects on the human being. If they've always been prepared on the pressure to win, once you come up against the defeat, that can be very, very difficult to cope with. But I would question this move from the Indian authorities on the basis that how relevant are the skills that these under-17 kids that now they're going to be picking up playing against far bigger, far stronger opponents? I would wonder if the resources being used in this endeavour might be better used getting these kids touring around the world and playing other under-17 sides when there is no physical imbalance. So then it becomes a purely a contest of football. Some sides might be physically stronger, some sides might be physically weaker. But you're dealing there with more footballing questions than the question that they're dealing with every week. How can we cope with playing against these fellows who are so much bigger and stronger than we are? So I would question the validity of this experiment based on that.
I wonder if this doesn't have an impact, a cultural impact beyond football itself, because you have told us in the past, Tim, about how in the early days of the World Cup, the Brazilians who were not winning the World Cup, and they were seen as the mongrel nation of South America. Those are the words that you described them, I remember very clearly.
Indeed.
And it had a kind of a social impact beyond football where people thought they are not worthy. They, as Brazilians, are not worthy, that they're not going to win the World Cup because they're not worthy, that somehow they weren't as good as other people in South America. Do you know what I mean? It has a social impact beyond the football.
Other people in the world, I think you could make a big distinction between Brazil's loss at home in 1950 and Brazil's loss at home in 2014. And 2014, I think, was more seen as a defeat for Brazilian football. 1950 was seen as a defeat for the Brazilian nation. I'm not going to use the word race because you can't call them a race. But there's no doubt about that. And you see, and Peru, I think, is such a good example because Peru, in all of these years that they failed to qualify, they didn't qualify from 1982 until now, there was a real toxic atmosphere of self-hatred coming at them, but they would often refer to themselves in derogatory racial terms. A really toxic lack of self-esteem. So there's no doubt that these things go well beyond football to a kind of self-esteem thing. And so I would, if Anand's still with us, I would like to ping this one back to him to wonder where India. Where the Indian, it's hard to talk about the Indian mentality when you're talking about a subcontinent, a country as vast as India is. But the aspect of losing, how on an Indian mentality, how will that affect the development of these 17-year-olds?
I agree to a lot extent with you regarding this. You put 17-year-old kid in a first league, and then when you play, every human being wants to win, right? So they try to find ways in an environment where they can't compete physically. So they will try to win in an environment by doing the same sort of things which the players in the first league are doing. So what happens is it hinders their development skills or basic football development skills. So if we go by the Barcelona model, that until you reach the first team level, there shouldn't be any emphasis on winning. Mm-hmm. There should be an emphasis on developing. So these 17-year-old kids, though talented they are put in an environment where they're expected to win, or even if they're not expected to win, they're expected to find a solution, and especially a physical form of solution, which they cannot. So you put them in a position without any tools. So that's my take on, regarding how these guys are going to perform. And this happens with not only the 17-year-old, 19-year-old kids, this happens to the big teams too. So that's one of my opposition to this European Super League, that if you have 20 teams, even if that 17, 18, 19 team will be, say, Olympiacos or, say, Red Bull Leipzig, they will still lose those matches because one team will gonna lose 20 matches out of 38 anyhow, because once you start losing, and I witnessed this in Indian Premier League in the first season, there is one team from Hyderabad which got 4 of the best players, Gilchrist, Afridi, Harsha Gibbs, and there's another guy. So 4 of the best T20 players, once they start losing 4 matches, they only end up winning 2 matches out of 16 or 20. So this happens with a lot of teams once you get on the roll. So these guys were not expected to, my whole problem with that is that they won't able to develop the skill set to find a solution at a higher level. And that's probably one of the England problem too, that English players graduate to a level, but when they graduate to a level where they need footballing skills to find a solution, they weren't able to.
Okay,
that's called improvisation at the moment.
I appreciate the question, actually. Really interesting one. Let's turn to...
I think that there's space for an individual to play alongside in informal football. And let's take the example of Carlos Tevez, who, in informal street kickabout, when he's 12, he's playing against kids who are 16. On that individual basis, because it's not an entire team, there as an individual he was able to find solutions. But when it's an entire team being outgunned physically, you wonder how much they're going to learn from that.
Yeah. Abdus in Chester's with us. Good morning, Abdus.
Hi, Dustin. How are you?
I'm all right. Thanks very much, mate.
Hello, everybody in the studio. Tim and Neymar.
Hiya.
Hello.
And everybody else.
Yeah, appreciate it. I thought you'd start singing, I am an Argentina football fan. I am a soccer fan.
I am, yeah, I am. Well, most Bangladeshi people are either Argentinians or Brazilians.
Really?
Yeah.
There were riots in Bangladesh when Maradona got kicked out of the 1994 World Cup.
Definitely. There's people that lost lives, suicide going on when Argentina get, come out, when they lose out of the competition or, the Maradona
why is this, Abdus? What's the connection?
Well, ever since the 86 World Cup, this is my theory, but it was when 86, when Maradona is one of them players that captured the imagination. Other players will come and go, for the rest of football, but they won't capture the imagination the way he did all them many years ago through his football and the way he knocked England out, which was a big factor. And because everybody likes to be England, put it that way.
And let's not forget, football is the national game of Bangladesh as well, isn't it?
Well, no, cricket is at the moment.
All right. Okay, I'll take that right back.
At the time, Maradona, everybody followed him and, he captured the imagination. They loved him. And not just because of being England, but what he did in the World Cup, almost single-handedly. He won the World Cup. And obviously his skill, his playing style, etc. So that's why Bangladeshi's got a big connection. Over the years, Brazil have joined in. So when Ronaldinho come along and players like that, the Brazilian Ronaldo has captured the imagination. So now you've got Brazil and Argentina as a rival in the country. When you go there, there's Brazil and Argentina, the two main teams. And when it comes to club teams, it's Real Madrid and Barcelona.
And of course, you're more or less a Scouser where you are in Chester, aren't you?
Yeah, well, I'm not a full-on Scouser, but Liverpool's in my blood. Yeah. And my one question is for Tim is Liverpool looking at any South American players in the future? If so, who? And remember last week when I phoned in, I had a World 11. Well, I took the constructive criticism and I've made amends. So basically, I've changed a few players.
So the constructive criticism was, could they all play in the same team, as I recall? And
that was definitely one, yeah.
Yeah, and which manager would have to handle them all?
Well,
there was not a lot of defending going on.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of defending.
There will be this time. I've changed it to 4-4-2.
You changed it to a 4. Okay, I'll tell you what. We'll hear your new 11 in a moment or two. Now that you've taken some constructive criticism. We've got the Legendino in the south, we've got the Neymar in the north and in the central, we've got Abdus in Chester, so this must be the World Football phone-in, and we're talking about American North and South. And Abdus is going to give us his World 11, first of all, after taking some constructive criticism last week. You've gone for 4-4-2, so run us through the 11, mate.
Yeah, no problem. The manager would be Pep Guardiola. I think he could manage egos as well as he's a winner. Casillas would be the keeper. I've put in Lothar Matthäus. He's from what I remember, he was solid. He had some good battles with Maradona, so I remember him. Baresi, I put him in because he seems to be one of the best defenders, and after everyone's favourite really. I'd still keep Maldini alongside him, and I'd have Cafu right back. I'd have Diego Maradona as the captain. I'd have Steven Gerrard alongside him because he's one of our favourites, and I think he'd fit into any team with his dynamism. I'd have to have Lionel Messi on the right. I'd definitely have Ronaldinho on the left. I'd have Iniesta just ahead of them with Brazilian Ronaldo up top. And there's a team full of, they are probably bound to have egos because they're all on that top level, but I think they'd all complement each other and suit the style of play.
Neymar, what do you think of that?
Of winners and Golden Boot winners and World Cup winners.
Neymar, what do you think of that? Give him some constructive criticism.
Well, no, it sounded like he took constructive criticism from our listeners recently. I trust the wisdom of the crowds.
Yeah, you go for that. Would that be your 11 as well?
I feel like I've made several 11s on this show before, so no, and I would put Rafa Marquez in. I just want Marquez in there as a CONCACAF player, but other than that,
what is Marquez a striker then?
No. Rafa Marquez. We could put Hugo Sanchez in. That's a bit of a stretch.
Okay. And would you still go for 4-4-2?
Yeah, I think maybe take out Gerrard, and then I guess so.
Take out Gerrard.
Don't do it to him. Don't do it to Abdus.
He's taking out Gerrard. He's giving him some.
Well, we all have our own. We have our own teams for love. I'm not saying he should take Gerrard out of his team. Clearly, he's not going to do that, even no matter how constructive my criticism is. And to be fair, it wasn't all that constructive because it was sort of half-hearted. But we all need our little favorite players from our region who we grew up watching, and so you have Gerrard. I have Marquez, who's actually a big villain for Americans. So, I can't.
There's many players we could put in there. Throughout the years, there's many. I was a big fan of Stoichkov, but he's a hothead as well. I was a big fan of Gabriel Batistuta, one of my favourites. And apparently Batistuta become a footballer, even though he didn't really enjoy football in his beginning days. This is what I believe.
So, Tim, what about your constructive criticism for him?
Well, I think he's cracked it. He's
cracked it.
It's a much better balanced team than last week. And last week was 11 fantastic footballers. This week is perhaps 11 who would work together a little bit better. There's more balance there, and there's still just an incredible accumulation of talent. And just think about having Messi, Maradona, Ronaldinho and Ronaldo. So you got Ronaldo with Messi, Maradona and Ronaldinho to kind of make the bullets for him, and Iniesta to link up with Gerrard to carry out his double role. I think it's a brilliant team. To answer Abdus' other question about Brazilian players linked with Liverpool. Now there is a chance here because Jurgen Klopp gets on very, very well with Chichi, the Brazil national team coach. They've over the last couple of years they've got quite a sweet thing going. So I think that they do talk about players, and there are a couple who've been linked recently with Liverpool. One is more unlikely, and the other is more likely. The one who's more unlikely, I think, is the support striker from Grêmio called Luan, who's around the 24 mark. He was voted the best player in South American football last year. Very intelligent, floats between the lines, picks a pass very well, and not entirely sure that he can step up. And the fact that he's 24 and still in South American football tells you something. And I think Brazil's coach doesn't really trust him for a number of reasons. So if Klopp is asking about Luan, I think Chichi, Brazil's coach, might say, I'm not entirely sure. But the other one is Brazil's first-choice goalkeeper, who is not Ederson of Man City, it's Alisson of Roma. And he's been Brazil's first-choice goalkeeper now for a couple of years, and that they stuck with him even during all of last season. He was on the bench at Roma. He's now first choice at Roma and doing very well. I think he's a really, really good keeper, and that's an area where you look at Liverpool sometimes and you think that they could improve. So I think the most likely new Brazilian to pitch up at Anfield would be the goalkeeper Alisson.
Thanks a lot for the call, by the way, Abdus. Look forward to speaking to you again very soon. This is a question from Ben in Colchester, who's laid up due to illness, but that gives him a chance to listen live. He's a 10-year podcast listener, though. He says he watches teams in the Isthmian South North and even teams below that level. So what he wants to know is, what's the non-league scene like in your respective regions? Is it, as in England, enjoying something of a renaissance due to the cost of going to top-level matches? Tim, first?
It's deep in Argentina, but we've just had some bad news in Argentina the last couple of days. They're scrapping some of their very lower divisions, who are officially they're amateur. I think the players get a little bit of money for it, but it looks as if those divisions are coming to an end. So it's not going to be anything like as deep in Argentina for as long. And one of the great things about Argentine football is the notion of the club being a representative of the neighbourhood or of the suburb or the city. So it is deep in Argentina, but coming under pressure. The problem in Brazil, it's nowhere near as deep as it should be. And the vast majority of Brazilian professional clubs are only active for like 3 or 4 months a year. So, if you only have competitive games for 3 or 4 months a year, how on earth can you keep fans? How on earth can you develop talent and keep a playing staff? So you just end up signing everyone on short-term contracts. Brazil urgently needs to sort out its calendar, which is just insane. But one of the reasons for this is the difference in the formation of football in, say, England and Brazil. And in England and Britain, football predates radio. So clubs were sprouting up all over the place, all over industrial society in Great Britain as representatives. It didn't all go national for quite some time because all this is before radio. Now, in Brazil, radio did a great deal to spread the game. The big decade for radio, it starts becoming popular in the 20s and then just takes off in the 30s and 40s. And that's when football is beginning to get spread all around the country. And so Rio was the capital. And it's radio taking the games from Rio all around the country. So people who grow up hundreds and hundreds of miles away at the other end of the country, they're supporting the big teams from Rio rather than getting behind their own local team. And I think that's one reason for the fact that the pyramid in Brazil doesn't go anywhere near as deep.
What about in the States, Johnny, or elsewhere in the region?
No, it's certainly not that organized. Even some of the regimented second divisions are struggling. In Mexico today, actually, there was a vote of the league owners to sort of change how promotion relegation does. So in the second division of Mexico, those are professional players, but that league is struggling to sort of get a foothold. And then beyond that, there's not really, pretty much everything that's below that is still affiliated in some way with the top division, secondary teams that the pro teams put their 20-year-olds in a different city and kind of play in a different name, but it's still sort of the reserve side. In the U.S., maybe we're seeing a little bit of a boom, but I'm not sure it's because of ticket prices at the top division. Top division football is sort of affordable in the U.S., especially compared to other sporting events. We've seen basketball tickets and football tickets go up and American football tickets go up. So you're also seeing, and I think this is great, and I think this is something that needs to happen a lot, small clubs pop up in some of the lower divisions, and now some of the sort of maybe what you would compare to non-league in Britain sort of catching a foothold. There's the NPSL, there's an amateur league as well. It's starting to become part of the local culture and get ingrained in some mid-sized cities. It's something you can be proud of course, having a soccer team. So it's starting to bloom, I think, and there are certainly clubs, when you look at Detroit, they've had huge success at a very organic grassroots level with a team in that division. Teams in Minneapolis, even though there's an MLS team there, I know there's a strong team. There's a new team starting in Nebraska. There's these teams in these mid or small American cities that are starting to pop up and be points of pride. But as far as that existing or that seeing a boom, it is in the sense that clubs are starting. I think it's going to take a little bit more time until people are really starting to go to matches and sort of have the culture, except in a couple notable exceptions like Detroit.
Yeah, question for Neymar from Evan in Santa Monica, California. And guess who he supports?
In Santa Monica, California. The Galaxy? LA Galaxy?
That's not a bad shout. What do you think about LAFC's prospect in the new MLS season on the field, and have you been keeping up with how they've been marketing themselves off the field? LAFC seems to be trying to heavily brand itself first and foremost, and do you think that appeals to people that currently don't have a team? I'm a Galaxy fan, as we have seen our team's fortunes decline in recent years. I feel like LAFC might have a real chance to win over people that were never interested in MLS or who have lost interest in MLS locally since Beckham left the league. LAFC have an attractive logo, a name that sounds less dated than the LA Galaxy and is more familiar to the younger generation who have grown up playing FIFA, and their stadium, I think, could appeal to a more urban fan since it's much closer to downtown Los Angeles and will be right next to a train line, unlike the very car and freeway-oriented StubHub centre that the Galaxy play in. Does John think that LAFC will be more successful in MLS than Chivas USA, for example?
Well, yes, I do. LAFC is an expansion team this year, a new team in MLS. I think they've started well, although I think they might still have work to do. Bob Bradley is the coach. You remember him from the Premier League briefly, and the U.S. national team and the Egypt national team. I think that's a great hire, and in fact, he has history leading an MLS expansion team. He coached the Chicago Fire when they came into the league and won it. So I think that was a good hire. They signed Carlos Vela, the Mexican, and they've done marketing around him, which I think is a big deal. LA Galaxy also have two Mexican players, and Giovanni Dos Santos and Jonathan Dos Santos. So there's a little bit of friendly rivalry there between them, and that's been part of the marketing as well. I think it has the chance to be a very cool rivalry, interesting rivalry. But you do have to, when you're building a club from the ground up, get fans. I've been encouraged by some of their moves. I would have liked to seen them do a little more in their Spanish language social content. I'm not sure the outreach was as aggressive as I think it probably should be, because I think a lot of the fans that are in that area near the Coliseum, a lot of the fans there are Spanish speaking first or bilingual, and maybe they want to have their content in Spanish. I was there recently in LA in that area, and it's a dynamic neighborhood. You could definitely pull in fans from downtown, and I think they're trying. So, in MLS, the marketing is usually not that much of an issue. The Galaxy market well, and they're starting to kind of market against LAFC, and I think it could be a lot of fun. But the biggest key, and we saw it with Atlanta United, and we've seen it with New York City FC, these other new clubs that have started in big city markets and have had to pull in attention, is one of the biggest marketing chips you have is a successful team. So I think one of the big things will be for LAFC to be good on the field. Like the email says, nice logo. Their jerseys are quite plain, so I'm not sure that people are going to be associating and buying their shirts as fast as they would have been if they had a really distinct look. But all that to say, I think they have a good chance to make inroads in the LA market. And if they're a successful team, then I think people will definitely jump on the bandwagon.
Their shirts can't be any plainer than the LA Galaxy's, which is just white. Can't be much plainer than that, can it?
Well, the Galaxy have a stripe, but the LAFC, they have just a,
they've got a
sponsor,
stripe,
and that's it. So, it's I guess in that Beckham era they did have a very plain white kit, but they've got a little more splash now. I mean, I think if you can make LA a soccer city, which it already is in many respects, kids play it. People who live in LA go to the games, their own games. You talk about like an amateur league situation there. People are going to watch their friends play. People are playing in adult men's leagues in LA. People are kicking around on the beach. It's already a town that loves the sport. It's about getting those people to the stadium, and I think both teams can survive and thrive in LA. It's certainly big enough to support two clubs. It's just about LAFC kind of getting it over the line and making sure they're drawing in the people they need to draw in.
I suppose one stripe is better than no stripes at all, but I thought you Yanks were all about three stripes and you're out. Anyway, this breeds at least some kind of rivalry, doesn't it? At least you get some kind of rivalry out of this. Nick, I know it was harsh. You must be suffering withdrawal symptoms, by the way, Tim.
Why? On what grounds?
Well, you haven't had a chance to do your Bill Shankly yet. You're going to get the chance right now. Hold it one moment.
I had one there. Abdus gave me a chance, and I showed.
Did you do it?
It's come late, but I showed a bit of maturity, and I didn't take it.
You didn't take it. Okay. Here's your chance to do your and I'll get my chance to do my Sven-Göran Eriksson as well, because Nick in South London, great email, by the way, he says, can the pundits think of an occasion in their respective regions where someone who went on to achieve greatness was present as a peripheral figure at another historic moment? For example, like rewatching a film and seeing an Oscar-winning actor as an extra in some film. For example, when Charlton came back from 5-1 down to beat Huddersfield, I think this is about 1950 something or other, 7-6. Bill Shankly was managing Huddersfield. And he goes on to say Fabio Cannavaro was a ball boy in the World Cup 90 semi between Italy and Argentina, and went on to be a World Cup winning captain. And apparently Ronaldo, as an 18-year-old, was at USA 94.
Was a player. Yeah,
well, it's not quite exactly. And I was thinking of Theo Walcott going to the World Cup under Sven-Göran Eriksson, who said, "Well, he might be able to do something. You never know." That's a terrible Swedish accent.
You've made him Caribbean, haven't you?
I ought to be able to do. I ought to be able to do. Sven, and I apologise, Sven. Now I apologise, but I thought I was going to do.
It started so well.
I know
it started so well.
It did. Okay, let's get back to the question then. Who can you think of who was a periphery figure on a historical occasion, Tim, and went on to be a great footballer afterwards?
Mario Zagallo. 1950 World Cup final.
Yeah.
That historic defeat that Brazil suffered to Uruguay. Zagallo is in the stadium. He's doing national service at the time, so he's in the stadium as part of the kind of crowd control, trying to control this sea of humanity, this 200,000 people. And then, lo and behold, 8 years later, when Brazil finally win the World Cup, who's there on the left wing? Mario Zagallo, there in 62, coach in 70, assistant coach in 1994, but his World Cup story started being there. It's almost like a Walter Zelig type figure, he was there.
Zelig, that was a great movie, by the way. Woody, it's probably one of Woody Allen's best, I think, in any case. Not many people remember it, but it was a great movie. What about for you, John?
I want a story like Tim's, but one doesn't come to mind. I can think of maybe a few players who were, on the bench, and then the next couple years later went on to be part of a team. But no, I can't think of anything. I'd love to, if there's fans in the region who can want to write to me on Twitter next time, I'll definitely throw it in. But nothing comes to mind.
I'll throw one in from Charlton's perspective then, because remember Scotty Parker was on that advert in some World Cup. I can't remember what World Cup. One of those blonde curtain hairstyles, and he was doing keepy uppy on an advert, and then he went on to be quite a decent footballer afterwards. Oh. But we always knew he'd be a decent footballer. He was in the Charlton youth team at the time, and they needed somebody, I suppose, that looked like Bobby Moore or something like that. It was after the Bobby Moore era, obviously, but anyway, he was doing the keepy uppy and some TV advert for something or other around the time of the World Cup, and then went on to become, not quite a World Cup player himself, but nevertheless. Rishi in Newcastle upon Tyne has tweeted to say, my question revolves around Arsene Wenger's position at Arsenal, with reports surfacing over internal talks instigated by senior players over the managerial capacity at the club. I was wondering whether there have been any similar managers in your experts' respective regions who've had such a long tenure at the club, but the board or the manager himself has struggled to decide when it's time to refresh the managerial position. Tim?
They're all out far sooner. And it's unheard of. Absolutely unheard of in South America for someone to stay as long as Wenger has stayed. I wonder from afar if the problem isn't so much him, the problem is the club, and the problem is the club's priorities. But there are people far closer to the action who can judge that one far better than I can.
How about in North America or Central America, Johnny?
It's about the same, although a lot of times what happens is these figures, if Wenger coached in Mexico or Costa Rica even, he would have been fired and rehired 3 to 4 times. A lot of these guys just come back to the same club. There is one exception right now, and that's Tuca Ferretti at Tigres. He's been there for, it feels like forever because he's been there for way, way longer than any other manager. But he's only been there, I think this is his 8th year with his current stint at Tigres. The next closest manager's longest tenure is about 3 years. So obviously that's 5 years if you do the math. He's sort of, kind of is battling and past, these criticisms. His style has been criticized, but the difference is that Tigres do keep winning. So if things turn, which I don't think they will, he said he's going to retire when his contract ends, which is in 3 years. So I think he'll make it, and 11 years would make him by far the Iron Man of Mexican coaching in recent history.
I like this one from Dennis in Grantham. He says, now that the VAR system has been approved, the video assistant referee system has been approved for the World Cup in Russia, will there be competition between referees from all countries to be the VAR official? I suppose Americans will want to be that, will they? A lot of the American referees will want to do that, do the honours. Johnny?
Why?
I don't know why. I just thought I'd ask you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I believe there were some at the Confederations Cup that did it, but they're also, it's usually referees who are referees as well, so it could be about the same as the competition for the regular spots.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that the only way that this can possibly work is if you keep the same teams. So you always have the same referee working with the same video referee. Because we're already seeing the huge problems that this thing can cause, because so many decisions in football are decisions of interpretation and not a fact. And so if you have like a referee out in the middle and a video referee who see things differently, then the potential for chaos is huge. So for me, this will be unworkable unless you have fixed teams. Like now you have fixed teams of a referee and his two linesmen. You didn't used to have that. And so they didn't have necessarily a working relationship. Standard of officiating is improved, I think, by having these fixed teams. And I think the video referee will have to be part of the fixed team as well. If not, it's chaos.
A little bit of history for us from Gary, who's tweeted me to say an outstanding Jamaican player in the 1940s and 50s was the late Lindy Della Pena, who played successfully for Portsmouth and Middlesbrough. Lindy rejected interest from Matt Busby's United as he found romance in the North East. Well, there you go. Have you ever heard of him, Lindy, at all, Johnny?
You know what? No, it hasn't come across for me.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, apparently Dele Alli was in the crowd to see Tom Daley at the 2012 Olympics. The rest is history. Yeah. Oh, well.
Very good.
Yeah. Zlatan is supposedly heading over to the MLS. Could Neymar speculate on which teams he might sign for?
Well, the only one would be the Galaxy, and I'm not sure. It's one of those things where you'd be surprised if it happens, but at the same time, maybe we've learned that we shouldn't be surprised by this kind of thing now.
But do you believe it'll happen, though?
As soon as I say no, it's going to happen. So, you know what? I think it'd be fun, so I'll say no. I think it'd be a great fun, but I know it won't happen. No, Zlatan, come on over. Give me the first exclusive.
Okay. I've heard that local football in Essex, semi-pro, I think, that sin bins are being trialled. Has there been trialled in anywhere else around the world, sin bins? Rather than, sending off...
I think it's a terrible idea.
Really? Why?
Terrible idea.
Why is it terrible
because
idea?
Because you're only losing one player. Yeah. So you're not losing that much of your force. It just means that you will waste time one way or another until you can get your player back. It's it's relatively easy to defend with 10 men for a short period of time. I think it's just a way of promoting defensive football.
And Bill in Glasgow wants to know if Alfredo Morelos of Glasgow Rangers has raised any interest in your circles since scoring 17 goals for the club in the short time he's been there.
No, I think him for the Colombia World Cup squad is an absolute total outsider, especially now Radamel Falcao Garcia is fit and desperate to go to a World Cup. So it's on the radar screen in Colombia, but not massively so.
And good evening, guys. Richard from Oxford here. So Tim was saying the Brazil squad potentially only has 3 spaces in it on current form. Which 3 players would he put in those positions? Very quickly.
Oh, that's 3 spaces for midfielders and attackers. All right, we'll go with Artur. We'll go with Douglas Costa of Juventus, and we'll keep one wild card to see who deserves it.
Thank you.
BBC 5 Live.